Perfect. If I can give one of you that. We've only got 2 microphones, unfortunately, but I'm sure we can share and make it work. So we were having a bit of a conversation over the break about what we were really interested in at Footsweek and things that you guys might be able to give us. And I think what we are really seeing as a company is that mobile development as a whole is massively on the increase. There's such a new range of new developers getting involved in the area, but not just at large companies. It's the most open and connected thing you can do. Developers, freelancers, anybody can release a mobile app into the App Store. And it brought me to a conversation we were actually having over dinner last night, when we were talking about general security issues. And I know we were talking about some of the things Marcus was talking about in his talk about hacking apps and various things. And you related a story about how you know, in the past when you've been able to successfully hack an app, you told the developers about the fact that you've been able to do that and highlighted the weaknesses in their app, and they didn't fix it. And we sort of thought that, well, that's going to be for one of 2 reasons. One, they're either just not bothered about it, or maybe it's because they have more things to do and they haven't got the time or the resources to fix it. So I guess if I can start with you, Marcus, what do you think are the key challenges in that area that face mobile developers, and how should we as an industry be responding to that?
Yeah, so just a little going back to this story. When I started working on my security talk, I was like, I wanted to come up with real examples, and my plan was to actually go on stage and name and shame those developers, especially the developers I got in touch with, and the developers who never got back to me, or the developers who said, "Hey, thanks," and that was it. And like I'm totally okay with if I hack an application and I get access to maybe the API where they, I don't know, say, and this is just an example, okay, so it's not something I did, but say you manage to hack the Foursquare application and you get access to like restaurant addresses, for example. That's all the stuff you can get from the API anyway. And that's totally fine, but there's been cases where I actually got access to user information, for example, and obviously not anything super critical like credit cards, but you know, user telephone numbers and user addresses and everything. And this is where I think, this is like, I was expecting a more immediate reaction from the developers by saying, oh, that's actually quite a bad thing, so we're going to go and fix it. Which is not necessarily what I got, and I actually keep track of all these applications that I managed to, you know, get information from to see if they fix it, to see if they do any releases, and most times you see updates as like bug fixes, but none of them actually fix the real issue, and I think the expectation from developers is that no one's really going to do that. Like, no one's really going to try and get my user information, for example, or the user's details. And a lot of people do. So I think I kind of imagine that these applications have a list of bugs, and there are priorities on them. And right now it seems like any way people are able to steal users' information is not on the top of the priorities right now. And this is like, I think it's probably the reason why I give this talk, because I would like that priority to change. I would like to see that, because it's my data, it's your data, like it's everyone's data, and I wouldn't want anyone to get access to it. I wouldn't want to start getting calls on my phone, for example, because someone was able to hack an application and publish the database, for example. So yeah, I'd say the main objective for me is try and look at those priorities and see what really matters to your users as opposed to what really matters to your business, because ultimately you can't be a business if you don't have users, and if your users get pissed off with you, then yeah.
So I mean, Dario, you work in security, and that's clearly your area of expertise. So I mean, linked to that, what do you think is the next big security challenge facing mobile developers, or freelancers especially, and how should we be responding to that?
Yeah, good question. So obviously the new kid in town is IoT and mobile apps that interact with IoT. And I think the biggest challenge for smaller companies is that they have really great developers that know how to develop an app, but they might not have the expertise to basically implement basic security controls, or don't have the knowledge on how to implement. So I think it's key that you when you assemble your team, your development team, that you have these guys with different expertise and somebody that also he has to be a security expert, but knows at least to look at the basic security stuff and implement it. And the reason why is because when when IoT is evolving and we're connecting everything, and everything is connecting to your watch or to your mobile phone, there's a lot of data being generated, and you have a responsibility towards your users to handle that data in a secure way, because you don't know what might happen with that data, and the user still needs to have control over its data. And it's a shared responsibility between the developers or the company creating apps and the user that is giving his data to your app. And I think the biggest challenge for small companies to get to a bottom line here is that they have to find a way to get good developers, but also some kind of security knowledge into the company.
And it's interesting, actually. I was very fortunate last year. I go to a conference called IOSDev UK every year, which is brilliant. You should all go, by the way. Which happens to have Aberystwyth around September time. And Dyson were there, and we did, at the end of the conference, they have a hack every year. We had a hack which was brilliant last year. We did Robot Wars with Dyson vacuum cleaners. If you want to see the video, it's on my Facebook page, you'll find it. But what really surprised us at FunSweek was how many security guys Dyson actually had there. You know, there were developers who were obviously helping out with the hack, but they had tons of security people they threw at that. Whereas, here at FunSweek, we've got 4 developers. It's a much smaller company. We can't afford to have people who are dedicated to security. So, I mean, how should companies like us respond to that?
Good question. Hire a company like ours. No, yeah. Basically, you need to find a way to get security into your company. So work together with experts, use proven libraries, use proven best practices you can find on the internet, because at least for Android, there are a lot of resources that are made for developers. Also, when I make presentations and I go to conferences like these, I go to various DroidCons and stuff like that, I try to focus on the fact that I'm talking to developers, not security experts, and I try to give them like a one-on-one on the security problems that I introduce, but also I try to give them really actionable steps that they can take without being a security expert. And it really depends also on the app and how much security is of importance in that app. For example, banking apps, if you're writing a banking app, then quite frankly, you need to get the security expertise in there. I mean, it's obligated by law because there are regulations. But it's a trade-off. You have to find how many expertise do I need here, and can I manage it with these best practices that I find online, or do I really need a security expert that builds this piece of code that I use throughout the rest of my app?
Definitely. And I think, Xavier, I know you're a big fan of open source. And Xavier's been pioneering the Code mobile app going open source, which we definitely will do before next year. Which I think is a brilliant idea. And I guess that's a really good opportunity to use a whole range of developers to solve problems, and to fix things en masse. So a company like us, maybe we haven't got the resources to put into a product, so use everybody to create something. So I guess my question to you is, when did you realize the true power of open source, and how important do you think it is for developers to contribute?
Well, I've been using Linux for my whole professional career. So I started using Linux in college, and so I never really stopped. And so basically when you start using Linux, almost everything on this is open source, except for some drivers, of course. When I found the true powers of open source was, there was 2 times. It was the first time I contributed to an existing tool. So basically, there was this feature that was missing, so I basically I just grabbed the source code and I skimmed through it and realized it wasn't as hard to understand as I expected, and I managed to make a dirty hack patch on it, and I sent it to the author, and he iterated on it and cleaned it up, but eventually the feature got in the software. So this was the first time I contributed, and it felt I had this sense of pride when I saw the next release having kind of my feature in it, and then there was also the time when I started releasing open source software. One of my first Android app, almost all my own Android apps are open source, and one of the first I did was just a text editor, and it was one of the first text editor because it was 2009 and the Android market wasn't very large, and basically because it was open source and didn't have ads, it got a lot of downloads, and eventually it got used by I think it's called OneDrive, so it's Dropbox concurrent. It's a cloud server, and they wanted to have this ecosystem of applications, and basically they used my open source software inside their ecosystem of apps. So basically they just added new features and rebranded a few things. And so basically, yeah, when you have open source things, it's like everything's in the open, everyone can contribute it, and of course for security or for bugs, it's better because you have more pair of eyes on the same source code.
Perfect. Just out of interest, how many people in the room regularly contribute to open source projects? That's a fantastic number. That's really good. Thank you for that. And I think linked to that, what I love about open source is sorry, go on, Dario.
Can I?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question about the whole open source thing, because it can be very stressful to collaborate to certain open source projects, and I'm sure it wasn't just me who had this experience in the past. But it's almost like when you wanna make a change to a Wikipedia page, for example, because you make a change, and then the generals of Wikipedia come and say, no, that's not good. It's this is not good enough. How would someone get started with collaborating to an open source project?
Well, I think the open source community has grown a lot with the help of GitHub. So before it was all on SourceForge. SourceForge now it's not what it was. But on GitHub, it's the philosophy of GitHub is really fork me and send pull requests. So I think for most projects there, the pull requests are accepted, and most of the time they are actually incited. We're starting to see at the good practice on GitHub to have a contribution or contribute documentation to say, okay, if you want to contribute to this project, here are the steps that you need to do. So for instance, you have guidelines on how to compile the project, but you also have some guidelines on code style, on unit tests, stuff like that. So for instance, on some of my own project, I added this to say, okay, I want to have your code unit tested and to follow this kind of style. And usually I also give the configuration file to so that the IDEs, so Android Studio or PyCharm, can automatically ensure the code style. And apart from that, contributing to an open source project is not always just contributing code. Contributing can also be contributing in localization, for instance, because, well, not everyone speaks English, so it's usually appreciated when you can come in a project and say, hey, actually, I speak English and Russian, or I don't know. So here, it's very easy, especially in Android or iOS, when you have this. In Android, you have the strings.xml. In iOS, I don't remember how it is, but you have also localization configuration files, and you can just take it, do your translation, and send it. And so there's no real issue with that. So except if you make a grammar mistake or something like that. But you know, adding localization, helping finding bugs, also testing, because the problem is that usually open source teams or the maintainers are not are small teams, and they don't have as much different devices or locals or different networks that might bring issues in the application.
Brilliant. And I think actually, I mean, for me, I think the power of open source is innovation, because I think that two heads are better than one. And as I mentioned before, a small company like ours, you know, getting the power of the community to really sort of help out is really important. And I know innovation is clearly at the heart of what goes on at Facebook, Trevor. You know, it's always been publicized in the news that, you know, Facebook are a very, very innovative company. And I guess, you know, some of you guys work for some, you know, large corporates, as it were, and there probably isn't a larger corporate than Facebook. But how do you think Facebook keeps innovation fresh in what you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's tough to sort of scale cultures in big companies, and I think we've tried and been fairly successful at it. A couple of things I can think of is, one thing we say is like, nothing at Facebook is someone else's problem. That's like a phrase that we use. So if you're complaining about something, like there's a bug or something out there, people say, well, nothing at Facebook is someone else's problem, right? So you could rage shake your phone and report it, but if you felt super strongly about it, you could also try to go fix it. So that's one thing, is that if you have an idea, you actually have the agency to kind of get it shipped. We still have, for a couple times a year, we have these hackathons, and a huge portion of all the kind of original products that we've shipped have come out of these hackathons, where basically you take a few days off of what your product work is, you kind of maybe get a team together. We have an internal group where people will post ideas or post mocks, then they'll form up a team and they'll hack something together. So many features have come out this way: events, groups, the original photo albums, I think the original version of Messenger, the like button, all these things that are kind of like core to what Facebook is, came out of just some people being like, oh, we want to make this thing and it's not our day job, let's get together. We also have hackamonths where you might have a small project that's in an exploratory phase, and so if you're a developer or a designer and you're kind of maybe looking for something different, you don't know if you want to join a team yet, you could go and do a hackamonth on another project and see where that goes. So we have a lot of things like that I think keep the culture where it's sort of still a hacker culture, even though we're a giant, massive company. People are still encouraged to, on their own time, to take time away from their product work to both learn and grow in terms of tooling, but then also to kind of participate in other projects. Like one of the things I plugged in my talk is stuff the design team has given back to the community, and those are all things that, you know, that's not my job every day, and to just make open source kind of design resources, but it's something we all feel strongly about because we benefited as designers from kind of the people who came before us and gave back. So those are all things that are encouraged. So I think it's just part of the culture, and it'll be interesting to see if it continues to scale, because, you know, we're still small relative to like someone like Google or Apple, you know, whatever it is, 20, 30,000 people. But yeah, so I think you have to have it as part of the culture, and you have to kind of take ownership of it as an individual and decide on your team that you're going to do something else for another team, or you're going to go participate in a hackathon or something like that.
So what flexibility do you have? I mean, obviously you've got a day job where you're working on a team, and I guess, you know, you've got your goals you need to achieve and things you're told you've got to do, or your projects you need to work on. What flexibility do you have to introduce your own ideas into Facebook?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on your discipline, how easy or hard it's going to be. So if you, as a designer, for me, it's actually quite easy. It's part of my job. As you increase like levels in your role, you're expected to initiate more projects and deal with more ambiguity as a designer and take on more responsibility. So it's actually part of my job as I you know, progress on my career path, that I'm actually proactively identifying problems within my team and our product space, and then actually putting them on track to address them, whether that's scheduling meetings with the right people and trying to convince that team that it's worth us putting it on the roadmap. So that's a huge thing, right, is road mapping. So if I'm in a meeting, we're planning our project for the next half, I'm going to fight like hell to say, hey, I think this is a big problem, and, you know, here's why it's really impactful, we should prioritize it. So I've initiated several projects in my time, like a couple of which have shipped. But yeah, it's pretty exciting just because I'm fairly young in my career still. But I've been able to kind of make the case for why this is important and then get it prioritized with the team. And as a designer, I think also my manager once said to me, like, he said, you know, remember that, you know, having the ability to sit in a meeting and talk about something and then make a picture of it is like a superpower to some people. So, you know, for me, I try to back up all my ideas with like mocks and prototypes, and when people see something that looks real, they can be bought into it, and they're like, oh yeah, like as a team, we want to make this real. So I think that's a huge part too, is kind of strategically how you do it.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much. Go. Yep.
Yeah, just to add a bit to that. So at Deezer, we also have hackathons a couple of times a year. But we also have, so it's inside the Android team, we have this kind of agreement that, okay, when you have like an hour or half an hour of, you know, you don't have anything to do, you don't want to start your task because it's almost the end of the day or whatever, you can start hacking some quick features inside the Android app, and we actually have a labs section in the app to just give to our community all the little small hacks that we can, you know, build incrementally, and basically every developer in the Android team is encouraged, you know, to add some feature that they think interesting, and sometimes those features get blown into a full feature of the Deezer service. So it's really encouraging when you have, you know, your rebuilding. You have a long time to lose, or sometimes when, for instance, when I go in conference, I'm waiting 1 hour for my flight. I start, you know, scribbling something inside the application. So it's really encouraging in giving ideas so that we can also be a source of feature, and it's not just the, you know, the product team or the product managers.
Cool. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but thank you very much. Please thank our panel.